From Fox 8 Sports, this is the Overtime Podcast.
From the Fox 8 studios and Newport Beach, California, this is the Fox 8 Overtime Podcast. Sean Fazende and Andre Johnson Jr. reunited once again to talk about some Saints training camp. But before we get into that, make sure to like, share, rate, review, and if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit that bell notification. Get the ding every time we post a new episode so you don't miss out on this fire content. Sean, how'd I do on the intro?
I think you did all right. There. By the way, good to talk with you again, my friend. Miss you. Wish you were out here in sunny Southern California. Actually had a pretty overcast morning here. It feels fantastic out here. I understand you guys have been dealing with a couple weather issues back in New Orleans. I feel for you, but out here, all is well.
Yeah, you know, I was in Miami for a while, and man, the same sun you're dealing with, we had that for a while in Florida, and it was fun. But we're back together talking about the Saints, and the number one thing we have to talk about as we're 7 days into Saints training camp, they're actually off today. So throughout the first week, one of the main things that I know you've noticed has been the pace of practice. Talk to that.
This has really jumped out at me, especially the last 3 days, because the last 3 days they've worked in pads, and we know when you work in pads, it's more physical, it's more violent at times, it leads to a few more skirmishes. But if you think back to training camp back in New Orleans last year and in previous seasons, how many times you'd have a padded session, a team period, then a stop, then a 10-minute water break, then a special teams, then back another 10-minute water break, then another team period. Here, the pace of practice has been rapid. It goes from one period to the next. It goes from stretch to one-on-ones to team to special teams, back to team. There's no real stoppage in the middle there, but obviously you have some great conditions here that allow you to deal with that in terms of you don't have to stop for much because you can just go from one thing to the next. You don't have to stop to hydrate quite as much, although I do think hydration is a little bit of an issue with some of the guys that probably got to pick it up a little bit. But I think all in all, the conditions certainly lead to a more favorable condition where you can go from one period to the next. But there's also this: it's a pretty deliberate, intentional camp. When you talk to the players, the leaders, the coaches, GM Mickey Loomis talked to us before camp started. There is a strong sense of self-awareness. There's a strong sense of urgency. There's a strong sense of intentionality because they understand where they've been the last 3 seasons. They understand they've been close, but close isn't good enough. And after 3 straight years where you don't make the playoffs, obviously you have to do something a little bit different. Derek Carr said earlier in the week that, what are you doing right now? What did you do last year? Because it obviously was not enough. Now you have to do a little bit more. They want to be physically exhausted, emotionally exhausted after every single practice because it gives you the feeling that they're giving everything that they have and understand the dire sort of situation that they're in. Last year they were 9-8, very close to winning the NFC South. They didn't win the NFC South. We know that. So no one really cares about close, especially in New Orleans. Especially when you think of the fanfare surrounding this team right now, which it's pretty down. I mean, let's be honest. The morale is pretty down when it comes to the fan base with this team right now. So I think they want to get back to work. They want to get back to the postseason. And I have to say, through 7 practices, 3 with padded, 3 padded, you can sense the intentionality and the sense of urgency. I have no idea if that means they're going to be better, and no one does, because there's a lot of questions still that need to be answered. But I do think the mindset is the correct one, because I do think there were times last year where the mindset was not correct. There were some things happening inside the locker room when it came to effort, when it came to understanding the professionalism that comes with being a professional football player. I don't think that was quite where it needed to be a season ago. That's clearly been addressed. Hopefully, and through 7 practices, we've seen it sort of pop up in terms of it getting better. Hopefully it leads to more wins, because it's ultimately what it all boils down to.
Right, and you can attribute a lot of things to that kind of change in urgency. You can talk about them understanding the position that they're in as a team. You can talk about them being in California and having a lot fewer distractions. But one of the main things that you can probably say that contributes to that is new offensive coordinator Klint Kubiak. We talked about him a little bit after OTAs and minicamp and how practices felt a little different with him at the helm. What have you noticed now that you're a week into training camp and with the pads on, about how different things are under Kubiak?
Well, the look of the offense is totally different. I mean, they run that wide zone scheme. If they're going to be good at one thing on offense this year, they are going to be good at the wide zone run, the outside zone run. That is the bread and butter of this offense. Everything comes off of that wide zone play, the play action, the bootleg. I would say, Juan and I were talking about this earlier in the week, of the, call it 50 passes thrown throughout camp through 7 practices, I would say at least 70%, think about that number, at least 70% have been play action. Okay, we have not seen that here. We have not seen that at all. And look, everyone is learning this new offense together, so there is a deliberate nature to you don't want to be the weak link. You have to understand where you're at. You have to know what you don't know. And they're coming together. I'll be very honest, though, the last 2 days, it was not their best days. With the pads on, they did a lot of third down work. Defense absolutely obliterated the offense during third down defense. So they got to get better at that. They know that. Third down defense, look, Dennis Allen's been running that third down scheme forever. It's a fantastic scheme. They're mixing up 3 down linemen, 2 backers, 6 DBs. They're going, when they go dime, or 4, 1, 6. They're blitzing off different areas. So they're throwing a lot at the new offense that's trying to learn the offense, but also understand what a really good defense, a really good third down defense looks like. So it's led to a good ebb and flow between the offense and the defense. If you really go by winner and loser the last 7 practices, I would probably give 4 practices to the defense, 3 practices to the offense. And frankly, that's what you want this time at camp, because you don't want one side dominating right now, because if that's the case, then you got a problem. Again, big picture, don't know how it's going to translate to wins and losses when or if they're going to be any better this year because of what I'm seeing right now in the practice field. But I do think there is definitely a different tone and a different look to practices and training camp right here in 2024 in Southern California.
Yeah, and you mentioned the defense having dominant days, and we can't talk about the defense dominating without talking about a dominant defensive player, and that guy has been defensive end Chase Young, who originally, when he signed here, we didn't expect to see him this early. The initial reports about Chase Young after he had that neck procedure was that we may not see Chase Young until the regular season. You guys get out to California, and he kind of surprises everybody, not only by getting out on the field, but by making his impact felt on that field, Sean.
Yeah, I mean, look, first off, when you look at him, you want him first off the bus. I mean, he looks like a football player. He looks like a beast of a football player, and he doesn't just look the part. He plays the part. You know, Pete Werner gushed about. They go back all the way to Ohio State, just how much physically imposing of a player he is. And I can't reiterate this enough. I mean, think of the injury history of just this organization in the last 15 years. How many times when it came to a star player, there is a injury that you hear about in the offseason, there's a recovery timeline, and almost 100% of the time, that timeline gets extended and goes further and further and longer to where the player is not back as soon as you would like. To have it flipped and to have Chase Young, arguably their biggest free agent signing of the offseason, back ahead of schedule. And remember, this is a guy who had neck surgery and has a history of injury. So if anyone is going to take a little longer, it would be someone with an injury history and a very, obviously delicate procedure given where he's playing at the neck, at defensive end with that neck procedure. So to me, getting Chase Young back on the field quickly has been the most important, absolute most important development of training camp, because there is no way, if he's healthy, he's going to be on the bench. I can promise you that. They're going to figure out some kind of mixing and matching when it comes to personnel, especially when it comes to third down, because Chase Young is just too good. He's had 2 sacks, a tackle for loss, 3 pressures. Poor Tali Faga at practice number 7, because he gave him a welcome to the NFL moment, because he did a kind of a jab step, then got under his pads and pushed him right back into Derek Carr in the final team period there. So Chase Young's presence, to me, we've talked about this on this podcast several times. You give them that guy, what he does, the style of play he has at that position to wreck the game, wreck the opposing passing game. That could be a game changer. That could be the difference between more wins and losses. Very tangible when you talk about Chase Young. And let's not forget, this was a guy who was a former number 2 overall selection a few years back. He was viewed at one point the next generation of great pass rushers, and injuries have kind of robbed him of that. So if he can get back to full health, I think he could be a true game changer for the Saints. I think that's the realest thing I've seen so far.
Yeah, and when it comes to Chase Young, you've got to credit him for really being able to take advantage of the opportunity that he had in front of him, because we talked about all the people in that defensive end room and how packed it was between Cam Jordan, Tano Passanio. You had Peyton Turner, Isaiah Foskey, Chase Young's in there, Carl Granderson, who had a great season last year, and Chase Young really was the guy to set himself apart. And for a while, we thought it might have been Isaiah Foskey who was the guy. We thought it might have been Peyton Turner, who's kind of fighting for his NFL life right now, who would be the guy to step up without Tano Passanio because he's still injured. And we didn't think Chase Young would be there. So we thought maybe one of those two young guys would step up and really make a claim for that position. But Chase Young making the surprise appearance at training camp and dominating, like you said, he's put the Saints in a position where come the fall, they have to find a place for him on that defensive line.
Look, he's getting on the field. There's no doubt about it. If he's healthy, he's getting on the field. And I'll also add this. Peyton Turner's had a really good camp. He has had a really good camp so far. I would say Chase Young, Carl Granderson, and Peyton Turner, when it comes to defensive end position, those three have had fantastic camps. Isaiah Foskey still kind of figuring it out. I know he's gotten a little bit better, but I think even DA said yesterday that they want him to there's more there, and they want him to reach that point at some point, that next level. But hasn't happened yet. And obviously Cam Jordan, he's doing some work on the outside, he's doing some work on the inside. And what he does really, Chase Young, when you add him to the mix, is just it gives you some flexibility with what you can do up front when it comes to obvious pass rushing situations. Him on the edge, kick Peyton Turner inside like they did in practice a couple days ago, kick Cam Jordan inside like they did a couple days ago. So there's a lot of options there with the presence of Chase Young, provided that he's healthy. And I'm going to knock on, there's no wood around here, but I'm going to
don't worry about
knock
it.
on some fake wood here.
Right here.
Hopefully, there you go. Hopefully this is the start of things to come, and there are no setbacks
right,
going
and you
forward.
can't talk about the defensive line without talking about the offensive line, which has really been the unit that many people have focused on when it comes to the Saints. We talked about the 5 coming out of OTAs heading to California that have been playing, which would be Tali Faga, Nick Saldivari, Eric McCoy, Cesar Ruiz, and Trevor Penning. Now, there's been a big change as soon as the pads came on, because we mentioned once the pads come on, everything changes for those guys in the trenches. And the biggest change we've seen so far has been Lucas Patrick, the veteran, really stepping in and making his presence felt at that left guard position.
And that the one we kind of called?
It is.
We kind of called that leading up. We were kind of talking about that left guard position when I was watching the offseason, the mini camp. You know, it was fine to pencil him in there, but once the pads come on and it gets real, that felt like the position that was most vulnerable. He's got a calf injury, but even before the calf injury, Lucas Patrick was rotating in, especially when the pads came on. He's a veteran that they trust. He can also play center. He played center yesterday because Eric McCoy had a veteran day off, and Landon Young and Ali Udoh split time at that left guard position with the first team. But the big picture at the offensive line is simply this. When you install the new offense, this new scheme, very specific, very deliberate, very intentional, as we've said, you have got to find the right 5. Plain and simple, you've got to find the right 5. There is no bigger sort of fact-finding mission for Klint Kubiak and his staff than that. And right now, it's looking like you have Fuaga, you have Lucas Patrick, you have Eric McCoy, Cesar Ruiz, and Trevor Penning as that 5 going forward, at least in the initial, wave of practices here. We'll see if things change. Trevor Penning was one I think a lot of people were looking at to say, okay, can he do it? Can he do it? Can he do it? The Saints want him to be the guy. So they are going to give him as much opportunity as possible. There's been some one-on-ones where he's lost. There's no doubt about that. But in this scheme, this run scheme that they run, there's a lot of moving forward, which he does very well at. He's actually played pretty well, and he even said this is the scheme that suits his sort of skill set the best. So Trevor Penning is a guy that I think came in, you were kind of, okay, can he hold on to it? Can he hold on to it? I think he's held on to it through 7 days. Now, we'll see what happens when the preseason games start, but if they were lining up today, I still think Trevor Penning would keep that spot. I know there's some questions or there's some concerns about depth. That's pretty much all 32 NFL teams when you come to offensive lineman depth. When it comes to roster sizes and what you're able to address on game day, there aren't enough quality offensive linemen to go around too deep around the NFL. So I think the Saints are dealing with that a little bit. We mentioned Saldivari, Ali Udoh, Landon Young is a guy that may contribute at some point as a reserve depth type player. But I think offensive line wise, I think they're getting closer to finding the right five. Then we have to see how good they are together when the games count, because I think that's obviously going to be a huge part of the process.
Right,
as well.
and I think it's good, especially when it comes to Lucas Patrick, that he's a veteran. You know, Juan Kincaid was actually talking to Cesar Ruiz yesterday, and he joked that Tali Faga called him OG, and he was like, man, I've only been in the league 5 years. How did I become the old guy already?
Right,
but that's kind of what you have around these young guys. So when you're looking at a Trevor Penning, when you're looking at a Nick Saldivari, and you're looking at a Tali Faga, it's good to have versatile guys around them who have been in this league, who have been there, done that. You know, you talked about Penning. You said Tali Faga kind of had his welcome to the NFL moment with Chase Young, but yeah, Cesar Ruiz said he's also, you know, he's figuring this thing out. And left tackle, you could argue, is one of the most important parts of the offensive line, being the blind side for Derek Carr, the quarterback. What have you seen out of Fuaga now that the pads have come on?
For the most part, he's been solid. Eric McCoy said he was the best rookie lineman he's ever seen. Keep in mind, Eric McCoy was a day one starter as a rookie at center. So, you know, that's a guy that's contributed a lot and has accomplished a lot, and he accomplished a lot at a very young age, Eric McCoy I'm talking about. So for him to say that obviously carries a lot of weight. There were a couple of moments where he got beat. You know, Fuaga versus Chase Young is not the easiest matchup, as we're seeing when they go up against each other in certain plays and certain snaps and third down defense. But I think overall, they feel pretty comfortable and confident when it comes to Fuaga at that left spot. It's so weird to say because Trevor Penning and Fuaga were the exact opposite in college. I mean, Fuaga was all right, Penning was all left, and yet they've switched over, and it feels like both those guys have gotten a little bit of comfort at their, I guess, new spots. It depends on who you ask when you talk to a lineman about, oh, is it easy to go from right to left? Or Fuaga, he says it's pretty easy, but you ask Penning, it's a little difficult. But nonetheless, they seem to be settling in okay, which is certainly a good sign. But again, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. I mean, look, they're going against the same guys, you know, day in and day out. I got to see it when the preseason gets here, and even then, we got to really kind of reconfirm it once the regular season starts in September.
And you mentioned the preseason. We're, as we sit here today, 9 days away from that preseason opener against the Arizona Cardinals. So in this last week and some change of training camp, what are you looking to see the Saints and certain players accomplish as they get ready for that preseason opener?
Well, I'm starting to really kind of zone in on some position battles. I'm starting to really look at, you know, certain areas where they could be strong, could be weak. For instance, I think they're very strong at linebacker right now. This linebacker room really looks good. The wide receiver room is something that I'm a little concerned with because I got to see who can emerge. And with Cedric Wilson going down with a groin injury, hopefully he comes back. The running back room is interesting because Jamal Williams Alvin Kamara's looked phenomenal, and obviously the contract issue has been put off to the side. He's looked phenomenal. But behind him, you have Jamal Williams, but a name I'm starting to really like is Jordan Mims. He's got a great cutback ability, good bounce. He can really cut, so Jordan Mims is a guy as well to certainly watch. And then probably the biggest battle no one's talking about right now is at safety, next to Tyrann Mathieu, because there's been a huge rotation there. There's been Jonathan Abram, there's been Jordan Howden, and there's been Will Harris, the first team next to Tyrann Mathieu. So can that sort itself out over the next couple of weeks or next couple of practices before the preseason games start? Was it August 10th in Arizona?
Definitely, and you could argue that after offensive line, that battle at the second safety position is the most important on the team, because when you look at those high-profile battles, you can talk about backup quarterback, but that's for a backup spot. You can talk about wide receiver 3, but your wide receiver 3 isn't on the field every single play. You can talk about, you know, Pete Werner and Willie Gay Jr., but again, not on the field every single play. But when it comes to that strong safety position, that's a guy who you're going to need almost 100% of the snaps. So that's a battle that, like you said, is flying under the radar, but it's going to be one of the most important for the Saints to figure out. Yeah,
and with the way DA uses his DBs, they use a lot of dime groupings, and sometimes they bring that third safety in. He kind of becomes the dime linebacker. They, you know, they'll mix and match certain personnel groupings. So it could be a starter by name only, and just in different situations they go with a different guy. But I think it's been a pretty good battle, and I think all three of those guys are going to get on the field. Will Harris, Jordan Howden, and obviously Jonathan Abram. So that's a good battle to watch as well.
And thank you, Sean. That'll wrap it up for us. You guys make sure to catch us again next time on Overtime.